3 years ago on an airline flight between Long Beach, California and Dallas, Texas, I became freshly intrigued with simple creative solutions. On that flight, I happened to sit beside Dr. Tom Kelly from the Department of Agriculture in Beltsville, Maryland. During that flight, Dr. Kelly told me about a simple creative solution that is so intriguing, that is so simple, that I just can't seem to get it out of my mind. I hope that by the time you leave here today, you too will be intrigued by the solution developed by Dr. Tom Kelly. For his research at the Department of Agriculture, Dr. Kelly needed to gather millions of tiny round mosquito heads. At first, he cut them off with a laboratory scalpel, and he found that in a very sweaty afternoon, he was able to gather about 1,000 of them. But then in a masterstroke, he and his colleagues devised a way to gather millions of tiny round mosquito heads in a single afternoon. By the time we landed at Dallas, Dr. Kelly had told me how they got the heads off. And I had told him about a simple creative solution developed by Dr. Frederick Tudor, who figured out a way to sell millions of gallons of ordinary Massachusetts pond water for as much as $1 a gallon to satisfied customers all over the world. When we parted at Dallas, Tom Kelly was anxious to get back to his laboratory for fresh research. And I was anxious to begin research on my 25th book, which is called Breaking Through. In that book, I explore the thought processes or winning strategies creative individuals use when they make major breakthroughs. And during that research, I've learned something quite intriguing. The people who make major breakthroughs have very different personalities. They have very different lifestyles. They work on problems that are very different. But the thought processes they use in making their major breakthroughs are hauntingly similar. And that is why all of us can learn how to be more creative. All we have to do is master and use the 6 winning strategies creative individuals use when they make major breakthroughs. In this talk, I will be reviewing for you those 6 winning strategies. Each section of the talk will start with a billion-dollar idea made by one single individual with one creative solution. The next part will explain what kind of thought process or winning strategy that individual used in making that breakthrough. And the last part will tell you how you can use that same kind of thought process in solving your own personal and professional problems. Now, when you write books, people think you're doing something complicated, but actually writing a book is amazingly simple. And if you promise not to tell anyone, I will tell you here today how to do it. Is it agreed? Yeah. All right. How do I go about writing a book? It's simple. I just take the 26 letters of the alphabet and arrange them in various patterns. How do I collaborate with another writer? That's simple too. I hit the vowels. I let him hit the consonants. One person, one creative idea, a billion-dollar breakthrough. It happened at Yale University shortly after a young gregarious undergraduate named Fred Smith was assigned to write a term paper on some business enterprise. Fred Smith chose as his topic overnight package delivery services. He was convinced that if a reliable overnight package delivery service could be instituted for the continental United States, it could quickly become a multi-billion-dollar-a-year business. But when he studied the package delivery services then in use, he was appalled by what he learned. Packages, he said, were hippity-hopping around the country in almost random fashion. A package would be loaded onto any handy airplane, headed in the right general direction, only to be offloaded again to await some other airplane that might carry it a bit closer. Fred Smith began to ponder the problem. Suddenly it dawned on him, if he would fly all the packages radially inward to one central location, offload them, sort them according to destination, then load them back onto the same airplanes and fly them radially outward again, he could guarantee overnight package delivery service to every major city in the continental United States. This unique hub and spoke architecture developed by Fred Smith ultimately became the basis of his company, which is called Federal Express. Federal Express, which is often cited by business school professors as an example of entrepreneurial creativity at its best. Incidentally, when Fred Smith got that term paper back, he barely received a passing grade. And what thought process or winning strategy did Fred Smith use in making that major breakthrough? He broke the problem apart and put it back together again. That is the first strategy on what I call the arc of creativity. He broke the problem apart and he put it back together again in a different way. You can learn how to do exactly the same thing. The managers of the Benihana restaurant chain found a way to break their problem apart and put it back together again to solve a problem that has plagued restaurants. I'm sorry, what did you say? She says, how can you remember all this stuff? Where are your notes? Well, it turns out that I have this kind of trick mind. My wife says that I can remember lines from movies I saw when I was 7 years old. The only trouble is, if I get interrupted, I have to start all over again. In my job as a professional platform lecturer, I travel almost as much. I can recover some way, right? Actually, my wife said to me, look, I know you can remember this talk, but what if you get interrupted? And I said, that's ridiculous. The people in Ventura County are so polite. They would never interrupt me. She said, look, well, just in case, why don't you tape some notes to your wrist? Tape a little piece of notes to your wrist. Well, we compromised. Finally, we thought about it, and I decided I would bring 1 page of notes. One tiny little page of notes that would help me, and she was happy about that. So I brought the notes here today. The only thing is I played a little joke on her. I knew I wouldn't get interrupted. So it's all blank. Surely there's some way we can get back to where we were. Maybe you could help out. What were we talking about? Now, I know that today many people contend that in this complex era we need complicated solutions. But I am convinced that simple creative solutions are still the key to a bright, shining future for our country. And how can you tell if your idea is too complicated? Well, follow the dictum of David Belasco, the American theatrical producer, who once said that if you can't write your idea on the back of your business card, you don't have an idea. Frederick Tudor could write his idea on the back of his business card. He found a way to sell millions of gallons of ordinary Massachusetts pond water for as much as $1 a gallon to satisfied customers all over the world. And how did he do that? He let the chilly Massachusetts wind freeze it first, and he sold it in the form of ice. He became the toast of his era, a multimillionaire. In his peak year, he shipped 292 million pounds of ice through Boston Harbor, bound for southern ports and indeed ports all over the world. He mined the ice from the ponds of Massachusetts and used trains to ship them into Boston Harbor. Henry David Thoreau had his sleep disturbed by the Fitchburg rail line, which carried ice into Boston Harbor. Later on, Walden Pond itself was mined for ice. And Henry David Thoreau wrote in his journal, "My Walden Pond water is mingled with the waters of the Ganges." Dr. Tom Kelly was able to write his idea on the back of his business card. He figured out a way to harvest millions of tiny round mosquito heads in a single afternoon. And how did he do that? He put the mosquitoes in a large glass laboratory flask, freeze-dried them to make the slender necks brittle. Then he shook the flask to break off the heads. And how did he separate the mosquito heads from the other fragments inside the flask? He merely sent them through a series of laboratory sieves with holes of carefully graduated sizes. And what if you would like to accentuate your creative problem-solving powers to come up with billion-dollar ideas? Well, start by following Abraham Lincoln's advice. If you have 8 hours to chop down a tree, spend 6 hours sharpening your axe. Surround yourself with supportive people. Find a way to reward them with 1%. Use liberal amounts of paper. And focus most of your attention on the 6 simple creative problem-solving strategies on the arc of creativity. If you do these things and you do them with sufficient enthusiasm, you too may someday make $1 billion breakthrough. And when you do, don't forget to send me 1%. Thank you.